Let's talk about question 7. So question 7 is about loops. So basically we have learned three kinds of loops, which is for, while, and do while. We'll look at them one by one. Okay? So part A. Um, in part A, you are required to uh, rewrite a loop using the other two loop constructs. So this is do while. So you're required to rewrite the same program using for loop and while loop. But before that, let's look at what this loop does. So sum equals to 0, I equals to minus 5. So sum plus equals to I, and I plus equals to 5. So basically, the sum is continuously increasing, and I, the indicator, the loop variable, is which in charge of the terminating of the loop, also increased by 5. So the I just keep incrementing until it's larger than 100. Before that, every loop sum plus equals to I. But after I is larger than 100, it will print out the sum. Okay? So how do you do that in the while loop and in the for loop? Let's have a look at the answer. Okay, here is how you do it. So, basically, sum plus equals to I is the same. So line 15 here, you initialize the initial value. Then in the while loop, you specify the terminating condition, which is I less than 100. And of course, sum plus equals to I, always the same, I plus equals to 5. Yeah. And the same thing is in for loop. You initialize the variable sum equals to 0, I equals to minus 5. All right. And then sum plus equals to I. And then after each loop, I increment by 5. All right. So this is part A. Let's look at part B. So this for loop is very strange here. So it's scanf, integer, and then, so you see, in general, typically this thing should be an I equals to something or n equals to something, and then here it should be n plus plus or n minus minus or something like that. But instead of that, it asks the user for an input. Okay, so what does it mean, and how can we do to convert it to while loop and do while loop to convert it to other loop constructs? Okay, so first of all, let's figure out what does this mean. So whenever you see for loop, you should remember the for loop's logic flow, which is assign the initial variable first, check whether it is valid, whether it satisfies this. Okay, so you initialize, you check if it satisfies the condition, it will enter the while loop. Enter the for loop. After the for loop, it will come here, run it, and then check the condition again. If it satisfies, it will go to the body, and after one loop, it will come here, run this code again, and check if satisfied, go to this again, so on and so forth, until after one loop, after it executes this, and then it's no longer satisfies here, so it will end the for loop. So let's start from the very beginning and track and trace and see what this program does. Okay, so print enter an n. So I will scan the n. After I scan, I check the condition first. Okay, so scan for n. If n is, let's say, less than 0, n is negative. Okay, n is negative, it satisfies the condition. Then it asks the user enter n, and then input an n. So basically, if initially I input a value less than 0, it will ask me to enter another value. And after I've entered this value will assign to n. If the value I entered happened to be less than 0, it will come here. Okay, less than 0, fine. So I'll jump to the body. Again, I'm prompted to input another value of n, which means if my n is always less than 0, it will always jump it will always satisfy this condition. It will always ask me a new number of n, which means whenever I input a number whose value is negative, I will always go into this loop until somehow I enter a value which is larger than 0. So scanf larger than 0 doesn't satisfy, so the loop breaks. All right. What if I enter a value which is larger than 0 at the beginning? Let's see what happens. If n is larger than 0, it doesn't satisfy. It will just terminate. It won't go into the body of the for loop. All right. So I think you have, I believe you have already known what this program does. So it just asks the user to input n until it is non-negative. All right. So how do we write that in while loop and do while? Let's have a look. All right. So this is an initial for loop. We have looked at it. Okay. So let's look at the do while loop. So do ask the user to input a new value. Okay. Scan it. If it's less than 0, I will do it again. I ask the user to enter a value. Scan. If less than 0, do it again until n is no longer less than 0. All right. This is the do while loop. Let's look at the while loop. First of all, I will ask the user to input a value before I enter the while loop. Okay? So if initially the user enters n less than 0, I'll ask the user to enter again. If the thing is still less than 0, I'll just continue. I'll just loop it around again. Okay? And less than 0. Okay? A scan if n is less than 0. Until n is larger than 0, I will just break out of this while loop. All right. What if the user enters n whose value is larger than 0 at the beginning here? Very simple. It won't go into the while loop at all because the condition of going into the while loop is n larger than 0. Okay?